Welcome to this lecture. And in this lecture, we are going to be discussed about method overloading in Java. Method overloading is a feature that allows a class to have more than one method having the same name. If their arguments list are different, there is similar to the constructor overloading in Java. That allows a class to have more than one constructor having different argument lists. Here is a question why we do method overloading in Java. In such cases, we can create the methods with the same name and the signature as in the parent class. This way, the new method masks the parent method and would get invoked by default. Overloading in Java is the ability to create multiple methods of the same name, but with the different parameters. Overloading occurs two or more methods in one class have the same method name but different in parameters. Remember that. Here we have three steps to create the method overloading in Java. Number one, number of parameters. Here you can see I just write add and integer. These are the numbers of parameters. We have the two numbers of parameters here. This is a valid case of overloading. Or you can write add int and integer of 3 times. Okay, so this is the valid case of the overloading. Our second process or method to overload in Java, so which is data type of the parameters. So you can see add integer and integer, then add integer and float. Okay, so these are the data types of the parameters. Number third, sequence of data types of the parameters. Like here you can see add, integer and float. Then add, float and the integer. So what are the invalid case of the method overloading in Java? When I say argument list, I am not taking about the return types of the method. For example, if two methods have the same name, same parameters and have the different return types, then this is not the valid method overloading. This will throw exception error, like here you can see integer add and it have the parameters like the data types which is also int, and then float add and it have the integer data types. So this is the invalid case because they have the different return types here. So for our these three methods, when I say argument list, it means that the parameters that are a method that has a method. For example, the argument list of the method add integer a and the integer b, which have the two parameters, is a different from the argument list of the method add, like add integer. Here I just write integer a and the integer b, and then here is example integer a, integer b, and integer c. These are having the three parameters here. So now we just go to the method overloading example. So I just told you in the last lecture the method overloading is an example of the static polymorphism. So here the some point which are static polymorphism is also known as compile time binding or early binding. I just told you in my last lecture. And the static binding happens at the compile time method. Overloading is an example of static binding where the binding of the method called to the definitions happen at the compile time. So now we just go to the example of this method overloading. As I discussed in the beginning, method overloading is done by declaring the same method with the different parameters. The parameters must be different in their numbers sequence or a types of parameters or arguments. Now let's see the example of this method overloading. And here I just create a class which is method.java. So in the method overloading class, I just create a method which is display, and then here I write system.out.println, and the print line here is I just write, and this is the print line, and then here I just write method overloading. Okay, and then we just go to the second function. So void is a display here. So void means it will not return nothing, and the parameters of this is x. Then system.out.println, and the print line here is integer value. Okay, then we just go to the third method, which is for display, and it will give us the float value, which is x, and the float value here is system.out.println, and the print line here is character. So float values, and here I just write float value. Okay, now we just define one another method, which is the name of display, and the parameters here are character x, and then I just write system.out.println, and the print line here is character value. Okay, now after that I just go to the void function and pass the two parameters here, which are the return types of integers. So display integer x and the integer y here. Okay, and here I just write system.out.println, and the print line here is integer and the integer, and after this I just concatenate x and concatenate y. Okay, now here, sorry, it's plus y. Now I just write void and display, which is the two return types, which is data types, which is float and integer, and here I just write system.out.println, and the print line here is float and then the integers, so plus x and then plus y. So now here I just write another function, which is, so this is integer and float. So void display, and the display here is I just write float for the first data type, and the second one is the integer, and then system.out.println, and the print line here is float and the integer, and then plus x and the empty string for the comma, and plus concatenate y. Now I just create the main class to call the object of this, to create or call the object of this function. So this is the main class here, and then I just create the main method, which is static void main, and then arguments, and the string arguments here is, I just write the class name which is method, and I just create the object with the method which is equal to new method. Okay, and now I just call the method here. So first one is display, then object dot display integer, and the integer value here is, I just write 525, and then object dot display, so object dot display which is for float, and the float x value here is, I just write float, and the float value here is 6.23. Then object dot display, and display for the characters, so the character here is Z. Okay, and now I just create another object dot display for our two integer values, so yes, integer x and integer y. So here the integer value is 45 and the value of y is 63, and then object dot display for the integer and the float value. So our integer value here is 963, and the float value here is, I just write float, and then here I just write 202.35369. okay, or here I just write 69. Now I just write object dot display, and display for the float and the integer. So our float value here is 523.89, and then the integer value here is 20. Now I just check the output for this code. So we have the first display method which is the float value and the character values. Method overloading, you can see the display method, and then here we have the integer value, then we have the float value, and then we have the character values here, and it will give us the two integer return types which is 45 and 63, and then integer and float values here, and then float and the integer values. So this is the method overloading example in Java. Thanks for watching this lecture. See you in next lecture.